Tonight on Newshour, Washington is ramping up its challenge to the Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro with a show of military might. President Trump is sending American warships to the coast of Venezuela. Now, US officials say the move is aimed at blocking narcotics bound for American cities, but the political message is equally clear. This latest step underlines how relations between the two countries remain among the most contentious in the hemisphere. Over the years, disputes have moved from economic sanctions to questions of legitimacy and sovereignty. Successive administrations in Washington have sought to weaken Caracas' leadership, while Venezuelan authorities accuse the United States of pursuing regime change. Now, the backdrop is one of persistent confrontation. Opposition movements have been recognized abroad, but at home, Maduro maintains firm control of his state. His government portrays outside pressure as proof of foreign meddling, while Washington insists it's defending its own security interests. The stage is now set for a new round of tension, with the White House determined to highlight its resolve and Caracas vowing to resist. The coming days will show whether this latest step is viewed as a tactical operation or the beginning of a much deeper standoff. Let's get the latest on this development. Mitch McCann is standing by for us in New York with this story.
Yes, Guy, the USS Gravely, the USS Jason Dunham and the USS Samson are set to head to waters near Venezuela in a move described as supporting counter-narcotics efforts. The deployment comes as the White House, under President Trump, attempts to crack down on drugs entering the United States from a number of Latin American countries. And earlier this year, the White House moved to classify a number of drug cartels as foreign terrorist organizations, one of them being from Venezuela. Earlier this month, the White House announced it was doubling a reward for the arrest of Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro. And President Trump's spokesperson said the Maduro regime is not the legitimate government of Venezuela and that it's a narco-terror cartel. In response to the latest US actions, it's reported Maduro is deploying 4.5 million militiamen throughout the country, saying no empire will touch the sacred soil of Venezuela. Maduro was indicted in New York in 2020 alongside allies on charges of narco-terrorism and conspiracy to import cocaine.
Okay, we've just heard from Mitch in New York there. Let's now take a look at exactly what US Attorney General Pam Bondi actually said.
Today, the Department of Justice and State Department are announcing a historic $50 million reward for information leading to the arrest of Nicolás Maduro. Maduro uses foreign terrorist organizations like TDA, Sinaloa, and Cartel of the Suns to bring deadly drugs and violence into our country. To date, the DEA has seized 30 tons of cocaine linked to Maduro and his associates, with nearly 7 tons linked to Maduro himself, which represents a primary source of income for the deadly cartels based in Venezuela and Mexico. Cocaine is often laced with fentanyl, resulting in the loss and destruction of countless American lives. The DOJ has seized over $700 million of Maduro-linked assets, including 2 private jets, 9 vehicles, and more. Yet Maduro's reign of terror continues. He is one of the largest narco-traffickers in the world and a threat to our national security. Therefore, we've doubled his reward to $50 million. Under President Trump's leadership, Maduro will not escape justice, and he will be held accountable for his despicable crimes. If you have any information to bring this criminal to justice, call 1-202-307-4228 or go online.
Well, thousands of Venezuelans took part in marches across the country earlier this month as part of a peace demonstration to reject that $50 million reward. Let's just take a look.
The event was portrayed as a display of support for President Nicolás Maduro, with participants described as taking to the streets in festive gatherings. Reports noted that crowds expressed their backing through chants, music, drums, flags, and banners, presenting the demonstrations as a response to ongoing pressure from the United States. According to statements from US authorities, Maduro has for years been accused of involvement in narcotics trafficking through what is known as the Cartel de los Soles. Officials have alleged that the organization has played a central role in moving large quantities of cocaine into the United States, and that Maduro has been a prominent figure within its leadership structure for more than a decade. In late July, the US Treasury Department designated the cartel as a specially designated global terrorist group, citing what it described as the cartel's continuing role in international drug operations. Washington has also insisted that Maduro's grip on power since 2020 has undermined democratic institutions and that he has maintained authority through coercion rather than transparent governance. American officials have pointed to Venezuela's 2024 presidential election, claiming that Maduro asserted victory without presenting sufficient evidence to substantiate his position. As a result, the US government has stated it does not recognize him as the legitimate president of Venezuela, maintaining that his leadership lacks credibility both at home and abroad.
For further perspective on what this means for US strategy in the region, let's bring in Mark Merowitz, Professor at the State University of New York Maritime College. Professor, good to see you. Thanks for joining us. Just put this into context then for us, please. How does this deployment fit into the wider history of US-Venezuela relations?
Look, Venezuela used to be a normal country. It used to have great relations with the United States historically, and the United States with Latin America. But after it was taken over by Chavez and now with Maduro, a former bus driver who has become a dictator in Venezuela, causing widespread starvation and poverty, taking the richest oil resources in Latin America and basically exploiting them for relationships with China and Russia and Cuba and Iran. It became a narco state. This is the United States position. And, I just want to mention, just in terms of US-Latin relations, the Monroe Doctrine and the Teddy Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. And the point is, the United States has taken the position historically that the United States has the right to intervene in Latin America when countries like Venezuela deteriorate into a failed state, which is the present situation in Venezuela. The inflation rate in Venezuela today, I believe, is over 200%. Maduro has squandered the assets. You see these demonstrations. This is indicative, we've seen this in the Soviet Union, Communist China. We know all of this is just a fantasy, a phantasm, an illusion, and nonsense. So the answer to your point is, what is the history of US-Venezuela relations? At the present time, they are just totally very, very bad because, frankly, the government of Maduro is not legitimate. There was an election previously where the president was elected, Juan Guaidó, and there were two presidents. Maduro said he's not the president, and there were two parliaments. And now, as you pointed out, a recent election in 2023, Maria Corina Machado, she won the election. Maduro, now she's in hiding because he said he didn't lose. So as you can see, it's a total disaster. But the worst part of it is the fact that many millions of Venezuelans have had to flee the country in order to find refuge in other countries because of the horrific state of life in Venezuela today.
Professor, we've heard some very strong arguments there. Clearly, there are some tremendous troubles, difficulties within the country. Clearly, this is a president that President Trump doesn't like. He doesn't like him. He doesn't like his policies. But we've also heard over the last few years, both in office and out of office, President Trump sort of pour disdain on those presidents before him who have taken an interventionist approach, meddling, interfering in foreign countries. Why the exception here for Venezuela? You know, critics would say just because it's a state, a person, a set of policies that President Trump doesn't like, why does that give him the right to interfere?
Well, I think this is a very clear point. Look, you have to understand about Venezuela, and I know a lot about this, and I've heard it firsthand from former diplomats in the Chavez era. Look, who is in Venezuela? Cuba. Cuba is heavily involved in Venezuela. Furthermore, the protective corps for, I think, for Maduro are Cubans. The Venezuelan military, incredibly, has 1,000 generals. There's no military in the world with 1,000 generals. This is just a Potemkin regime. I'm sure you're familiar with Potemkin. This is a phony regime. It's just a facade of fairness and democracy because it is a tyrannical dictatorial state. Its closest friends are China, Russia, Cuba, and Iran. The people are persecuted, and the United States, I don't think it's a question of personal disdain, is a question of the fact that the OAS, Organization of American States, other Latin American countries have supported the U.S. position that this regime is not a valid regime. They lose elections and then they claim that they win them. And then they basically cause, like Maria Machado, she's in hiding. I mean, how is this possible that this is going on? And so the United States is not going to tolerate it, particularly because it is in our neighborhood and we have a failed state, which is an ally of many adversaries of the United States. So I don't think it's a personal disdain on the part of the president. I think the president, and also, and here is the point I think that you mentioned, which is the key, in that Venezuela is a narco state, and it's bringing millions and millions of pounds of cocaine and fentanyl and you name it into the United States. Mexico had this issue. President Sheinbaum dealt with it. Venezuela is a narco state. They're not dealing with it. The United States is trying to deal with it and prevent the influx of dangerous drugs into the United States. So there, it's not a question of disdain. It's a question of two things. One, legitimacy of the rulership, which is illegitimate and has been thrown out of office, but still maintains that it is in office. And secondly, what you talked about, the cartel of the soles, the cartel of the suns, and the other cartels, which are basically the essential element of what this state is doing, which is a drugs exporter. So I think the United States is taking action to deal with this. And you know that this previously, the United States took a similar action with Panama, with Noriega. And, as you said, he was indicted. So, I think this is a matter of the Latin American countries, United States, Europeans, and others getting together and saying, no, this is not fair play. You can't do this.
Professor, let's just dig into that strategy a little bit more, if we can. The outcome. So clearly, we can see the pressure being applied. What are the specific outcomes that that pressure is designed to produce? Is it about very quick regime change? Is there something else going on? Talk to us about the objectives that are intended to occur as a result of this pressure.
Well, I mean, I don't think regime change is really an option here. I don't think it's going to happen. I think Trump tried this in the first term, his first term. It doesn't work. He tried to support Juan Guaidó, who was elected fairly and properly, and basically Maduro suppressed it. I think it's a message. A message is being sent. Because I don't think, with the support of China and Russia and Cuba, Iran is a weakened state. But I'm saying all of those of our adversaries, particularly China and Russia, and we're working with Russia now on trying to work out a solution with Ukraine, working with China on our economic issues and China's rise. So I think it's unlikely that there'll be regime change if those states still buttress and support Venezuela, which they appear to be doing. On the other hand, I think sending these ships and this is not just a couple of ships, but it's a whole array of military assets are being sent there. to send a message. And maybe it's a form of blockade. I don't know. Nobody asked me on the planning, but it does send an important message. And it also sends a message to Latin American countries that, a narco state in the middle of Latin America is not going to be tolerated. And the problem with it is started with Chavez too. I mean, Chavez, socialist leader, used to sit with his red shirt. You're seeing that in the pictures, the red shirts. He used to harangue and sit for hours and harangue people and speak to them for hours and hours. Very much similar to Fidel. That was Chavez's great, idol, Fidel Castro. So, they want to create a Cuban-style regime, but you know what? Look, a failed economic state. People live there in poverty. They live like they lived in the 1950s. You look at Venezuela, people are starving, a country with incredible oil assets, unbelievable oil resources squandered by failure of leadership. So, things end up righting themselves and getting themselves in world politics. But right now we're at an inflection point in politics where maybe this one is going to be more a show of force rather than a full-on intervention, I don't think.
And Mark, in terms of that show of force working, Maduro does seem to have managed to have sort of soaked up this pressure. He's consolidated power despite, what's happened so far. Is that to do with the ideology, the cult of personality? Does that make his regime, very difficult to actually nudge into any form of action?
It's pure pressure by military and using militias and other military backed up by Cubans and other elements in the country to suppress the people, make sure that they won't have a free and fair election. We've seen it already now a number of times. They have elections. People win the election. He says you didn't win the election, and now you have to go in hiding. So I think there, the consolidation of power is the regime itself, backed up by their good friends, some of which have said they have, forever relationships and strong relations. Why in the world? I've always wondered about this. What is Iran, for example, or I get Cuba, in favor of it, but I get Cuba, here that they intervene in Latin America, because they're Latin American, but they're in the region. But China and Russia, what is going on here? This was over maybe some of our past President Trump is not going to tolerate, particularly the influx of the drugs into the United States. So, and the other problem, I would say, is the international system. Look, EU, UN, Organization of American States, all of them have spoken and acted to say this is legitimate. Yet, they're not able to take any action in the UN against them because Russia and China have a veto. And they can stop the UN and stop the UN from doing anything about it. But see, to me, the ones who suffer are the people. The people suffer here, and that's part. People suffering, and the international community can't have or a system to do something about it.
And Professor, you've spoken about those actors overseas. Just turning to neighbouring countries, to what extent do you think this pressure could also influence countries very close to Venezuela in the region? Is this really a consistent strategy towards Latin America as a whole? And if so, how important is it that the strategy is deployed holistically together for the region?
It's a very interesting question. I think the Latin American countries, we've gone through many different iterations. We had Nixon visiting Latin America, and there were riots, and Yankee go home. And, the thing where Latin America has had, I think, a feeling of, let's say, inferiority, or let's say the United States has been overarching in its influence in Latin America. And they're concerned that, the U.S. is kind of, as you say, intervening and doing regime change and things like that. But so there's kind of, I think, a little bit of a love-hate relationship. And the other problem is the immigration issue from Latin America is a big issue here in the United States, where a lot of the immigrants are coming over from Mexico and Central America and so forth. So Latin America relations with the U.S. are great, but at the same time, I think that this type of show of force, I think the Latin American countries, neighboring countries, are going to take some pause about this and be concerned about the impact of this on their independence and sovereignty and so forth. So at the same time, I'm quite sure they're very, very unhappy with what Venezuela is doing to its own people. So it's kind of a tricky gambit here for the Latin American neighbors. They also face problems of terrorism in their own countries, and the fact that Venezuela has been a supporter of some of those groups as well. So it's a complicated issue. I would say finally, the United States focus on America, interestingly, has not been very impactful or significant. Like the United States is in the Middle East, the United States is working on the Ukraine war, the United States is involved with China and tariffs all around the world. And I didn't really hear from that they're doing a lot with Latin America, except for Mexico and the problem of fentanyl, and that's related to immigration. So the idea of focusing now on Venezuela is sort of, I think, an interesting departure from that. And what does it mean? Sending ships there? Well, are they going to do something? I mean, there's a war with Venezuela like the British did with the Falklands. You might remember Malvinas, Argentinas. The British were not happy about that one, especially the expenditure of millions of pounds to support that war with casualties. So that idea of intervention and involvement of this magnitude is, I think, very controversial in Latin America. I'm pretty sure about it.
And President Trump has said at least once, I believe, that he would be open potentially to meeting with Maduro. Do you think there's any chance at all now of any form of direct dialogue?
That is, I think, my favorite question that you asked today. Never say never with Trump. Never say never with Trump, okay? I mean, what he has accomplished, he got Putin to sit down with him and talk about Ukraine. Now, people might say, well, he had a red carpet, it doesn't mean anything, but I think it's very meaningful. Hillary Clinton said that Trump should get a Nobel Peace Prize. Did you believe that one? So I am thinking, is it possible? Sure, it's possible. Trump is he's just not, following what we think of he's going to do something for peace. If there's something he can do for peace, he will do it for peace. So I would say nothing is out of the question in this situation. Whether Maduro would want to sit down with Trump, I don't know. And also, Maduro has been indicted in a court in the United States. So I think that's also going to interfere with that meeting. But the idea of sitting down and meeting, never say never with Trump. Never.
Never say never with Trump. We'll have to leave it there. Mark Merowitz, professor at the State University of New York Maritime College. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
It's a pleasure, Guy. Thank you.
Well, that does bring us to the end of this edition of NewsHour. The standoff between Washington and Caracas is once again testing the balance of power in the Americas, with history and politics shaping every move at sea and on shore. From all of us here at AnewZ, thanks for being with us.